Ambassador Vela stood motionless before the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the Council's observation chamber. Her four luminous eyes blinking in rapid succession as she struggled to process what the sensors were showing her. For 300 cycles, the Galactic Council had monitored the small, blue world called Earth with nothing more than passing curiosity and mild amusement. The primitive species that inhabited that distant rock had barely mastered the art of leaving their own atmosphere, their crude chemical rockets sputtering into the void like the desperate gasps of a drowning creature. They were a species still obsessed with burning ancient plant matter for energy, still waging petty wars over invisible lines drawn in dirt, still broadcasting their electromagnetic noise into the cosmos like children screaming into an empty cave. The Council had catalogued them under the designation of pre-emergent civilization and assigned a single monitoring station to observe their slow crawl toward eventual spacefaring status. Nobody had expected anything significant from humanity for at least another 1,000 cycles. That assumption had just shattered into a million pieces. The signal that had arrived at the monitoring station 17 hours ago was unlike anything the primitive humans had ever produced before. It was not the chaotic jumble of entertainment, broadcasts, and military communications that usually leaked from their noisy little world. This was something entirely different. This was a directed transmission, mathematically perfect in its construction, carrying patterns that no random noise could ever produce. The frequency had been chosen with deliberate precision to cut through the background radiation of space like a blade through silk. High Analyst Corinth had been the first to recognize what they were receiving, and his reaction had sent shockwaves through the entire monitoring network. "This is not accidental," he had declared, his scaled hands trembling as they moved across the control interface. "This is first contact protocol, and they are executing it flawlessly." Ambassador Vela had rushed to the observation chamber the moment the alert reached her quarters, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. How had the humans advanced so quickly? What had changed in the brief century since the Council's last detailed survey of their world? The translation algorithms took mere moments to decode the message, and when the words appeared on the display screen, Vela felt her heart skip several beats. "To any who receive this message, humanity extends greetings and friendship. We have achieved faster-than-light capability and wish to establish peaceful relations with our galactic neighbors. A delegation ship has been dispatched to the coordinates embedded in this transmission. Please do not be alarmed by our approach. We come in peace." The words seemed innocent enough, even hopeful in their naive optimism, but something about the message made Vela deeply uneasy. Though she could not identify exactly what was causing her discomfort, she had witnessed dozens of first-contact events during her long career as a Council ambassador. New species emerged from their cradles with predictable regularity, usually timid and overwhelmed by their first glimpse of the greater galactic community. They arrived in small vessels, often barely functional. Their representatives, nervous and eager to please the Council, would evaluate them, determine their potential contribution to the greater civilization, and either offer provisional membership or assign them to a monitored development program. It was a routine process, refined over countless millennia. But this message from the humans carried an undertone that Vela had never encountered before. There was confidence in those words, perhaps even a hint of something that almost resembled a warning. "Please do not be alarmed by our approach." Why would they need to say that? What kind of vessel were they sending that might cause alarm? High Counselor Threx arrived at the observation chamber surrounded by his usual entourage of advisors and tactical specialists. He was an imposing figure, Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with skin the color of polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with the cold light of calculated intelligence, Threx had led the Council through 17 major crises during his tenure, and he had developed a reputation for unshakable calm in the face of any threat. "Show me the transmission," he commanded. His voice resonating through the chamber like the rumble of distant thunder, Vela gestured toward the display, allowing the message to replay in its entirety. Threx watched with an expression of mild interest, one of his massive hands stroking the ceremonial chain that hung around his neck. "Fascinating," he said when the message concluded. "The humans have apparently made significant progress since our last assessment. This is unexpected but not unprecedented. Species occasionally experience rapid technological advancement when certain conditions align." "High Counselor," Vela said carefully, "I recommend we dispatch a defensive fleet to the rendezvous coordinates. Something about this situation feels wrong to me." Threx turned to regard her with what might have been amusement, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Ambassador, you are allowing your imagination to cloud your judgment. The humans are a species that was still using nuclear fission for power generation less than one of their centuries ago. Whatever vessel they are sending will be a remarkable achievement for them, but hardly a threat to a coalition that spans 400 member worlds." "But the message specifically warned us not to be alarmed," Vela pressed. "Why would they include such a statement unless they anticipated that their arrival might cause concern, cultural anxiety?" One of Threx's advisors interjected, a thin creature with too many limbs and a voice like rustling paper. "Primitive species often project their own fears onto first contact scenarios. They assume we will react to them as they would react to an unknown presence. It is a common psychological pattern among newly emerged civilizations." Threx nodded in agreement, clearly satisfied with this explanation. "We will welcome these humans according to standard protocol," he declared. "A small diplomatic delegation will meet them at the designated coordinates. We will evaluate their capabilities, assess their cultural development, and determine whether they are suitable candidates for council membership." He paused, a thin smile crossing his dark features. "Perhaps they will prove to be a useful addition to our community. Even the most primitive species occasionally possess unique perspectives or resources that can benefit the greater whole." Vela wanted to argue further, but she knew that challenging the High Counselor in front of his advisors would accomplish nothing except damaging her own position. She bowed her head in reluctant acceptance. "As you command, High Counselor." The decision had been made. A small diplomatic vessel would be dispatched to greet humanity's first interstellar envoy, carrying a team of ambassadors, cultural analysts, and a minimal security escort. Nobody saw any reason for greater precautions. The humans were, after all, just another emerging species, taking their first tentative steps into the wider universe. Surely there was nothing to fear from such a young and inexperienced civilization. Vela returned to her quarters that night with a sense of dread coiling in her stomach like a serpent preparing to strike. She could not shake the feeling that the Council was making a terrible mistake, that they were about to encounter something that would shatter every assumption they have ever made about the nature of emerging species. Sleep eluded her entirely as she lay in her rest pod, staring at the ceiling and wondering what manner of vessel the humans were sending to meet them. She would not have to wait long for her answer. In 72 hours, the rendezvous would take place, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Senior Analyst Coyant had dedicated his entire adult life to the study of alien vessels and the civilizations that built them. He had spent 400 cycles cataloging the elegant solar sailors of the Vethian Confederacy, graceful constructions of light and energy that danced through space like living poetry. He had documented the brutal efficiency of crawl hunter ships, all sharp angles and exposed weapons designed to strike terror into their prey. before the first shot was ever fired. He had witnessed the crystalline beauty of the singing fleet, vessels that hummed with harmonic frequencies as they glided through the void like jewels cast across black velvet. In all his years of study, Corinth had developed a comprehensive understanding of how different species approached the challenge of spacecraft construction. Cultural values inevitably expressed themselves in ship design. Peaceful species built vessels that emphasize beauty and efficiency. Aggressive species created machines of intimidation and destruction. Logical species constructed purely functional craft with no wasted space or unnecessary ornamentation. Every ship told a story about the beings who had created it. Corinth had believed he understood every possible variation of that story. He had been catastrophically wrong. The diplomatic delegation had arrived at the designated coordinates 3 hours ahead of schedule. Their small vessel taking up position in the empty space between star systems where the humans had requested the meeting take place. The location itself was unusual, far from any inhabited world or established trade route. Most emerging species chose to meet near their home system, eager to show off their achievements and demonstrate their legitimacy to the galactic community. The humans had selected a point that was essentially nowhere. A patch of darkness so remote that the nearest star was barely visible to the naked eye. Corinth had noted this oddity in his preliminary report, but had not assigned it any particular significance. He had assumed the humans were simply being cautious, perhaps worried about revealing the location of their home world to unknown alien powers. That assumption had been partially correct, though not in the way he had imagined. The long-range sensors detected the approaching vessel 17 minutes before it was scheduled to arrive. At first, Corinth thought the equipment was malfunctioning. The readings made no sense at all. There must be an error, he said to his assistant, a young female of his species who was still learning the intricacies of sensor analysis. These numbers cannot possibly be accurate. He recalibrated the equipment and ran the scan again. The results were identical. Ambassador Vela, Corinth called out, his voice cracking with something that might have been fear. You need to see this immediately. Vela crossed the observation deck with quick steps, her 4 eyes already fixed on the sensor display with growing concern. The data streaming across the screen painted a picture that defied everything they had expected. The approaching vessel was not a small diplomatic craft nervously making its way through unfamiliar space. It was not a modest research vessel carrying excited scientists eager to study alien life forms. It was not even a reasonably sized military escort bringing security forces to protect vulnerable diplomats. What emerged from hyperspace in front of them was a mountain of dark metal and bristling weapons platforms that blotted out the stars behind it, like a cloud of absolute darkness swallowing the light of creation itself. The ship stretched 17 kilometers from bow to stern, a titan of destruction that made their diplomatic vessel look like an insect hovering before a predator of unimaginable proportions. Its hull was covered with weapons arrays of every conceivable type, row upon row of devices designed for violence. On a scale that Corinth could barely comprehend, missile batteries capable of launching hundreds of warheads simultaneously lined the vessel's flanks like the spines of some prehistoric monster. Energy weapon emplacements glowed with barely contained power, their targeting systems sweeping across space in constant search of threats. And along the spine of the behemoth, Corinth's sensors detected something that made his blood run cold. A weapon system of such immense power that his instruments could not even calculate its destructive potential. The readings simply displayed an error message, unable to process numbers that exceeded their program parameters. That cannot be a first contact vessel, whispered Delegate Cirrus, her scales turning from healthy green to sickly pale as she stared at the approaching nightmare. That is not a ship at all. That is a weapon designed to destroy worlds. Corinth forced his trembling hands to continue their work. cataloging every detail his sensors could detect about the impossible vessel before them. The shield generators operated on principles that the Council had deemed theoretically impossible, creating defensive barriers that could apparently withstand firepower capable of cracking planets. The whole composition seemed to absorb sensor readings like a black hole swallowing light, making detailed scans nearly impossible. What little data Corinth could gather suggested materials and construction techniques that the Council's most advanced member species had never even theorized. This ship had not been built by a primitive civilization taking its first steps into space. This ship had been built by a species that understood war on a level the Council had never encountered. As the vessel grew closer, Corinth finally managed to capture a clear image of its forward section. There, emblazoned across the dark hull in letters that seemed to glow with their own internal light, was a name and a designation that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. Prometheus. He read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper, and beneath it, a classification. Colossus-Class Dreadnought. First of the line. First of the line. The words echoed through the observation deck like a death sentence. This was not the only vessel of its kind. The humans had built more. Perhaps many more. Ambassador Vela stood in silence, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she thought she knew about emerging civilizations. The humans had been burning fossil fuels less than a century ago. They had been killing each other over territorial disputes and ideological differences. They had been polluting their own planet and arguing about whether their climate was actually changing. How had such a species built something like this? How had they advanced from chemical rockets to a vessel that could challenge the combined military might of the entire Galactic Council in a single human lifetime? The Prometheus came to a stop exactly 1,000 kilometers from the diplomatic vessel, its massive bulk filling every viewport with darkness and barely visible weapon systems. A communication channel opened, and a voice spoke in perfectly translated Galactic Standard. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth vessel Prometheus. We have arrived for the scheduled meeting and request permission to send a shuttle with our diplomatic delegation. Please respond at your earliest convenience." The voice was calm and professional, almost friendly in its tone. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly how much power they commanded and saw no need to make threats or demonstrations. The message was clear, without a single aggressive word being spoken. Humanity had arrived, and they had brought enough firepower to ensure that their arrival would be taken very seriously. Indeed, Vela realized her hands were shaking as she reached for the communication controls. For the first time in her long career, she had absolutely no idea what to say. The council chamber had not witnessed such chaos in over 1,000 cycles. Representatives from dozens of member species crowded the speaking floor, their voices overlapping a cacophony of terror and outrage that made coherent discussion nearly impossible. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the Prometheus in all its terrifying glory. The image captured by the diplomatic vessel sensors and transmitted directly to the council's headquarters. Every representative in the chamber had been staring at that image for hours, and the fear it inspired had not diminished with time. Ambassador Kreth of the Valorian Collective was the first to demand formal recognition from the presiding arbiter, his tentacles flailing with barely controlled hysteria as he addressed the assembly. "They have violated 17 first contact protocols," he screamed, his voice distorting with the intensity of his emotions. 17 protocols that every emerging species in galactic history has followed without exception. A warship of this magnitude at a first contact meeting is not diplomacy. It is a declaration of hostile intent. The humans claim peaceful intentions, Vela countered from her position on the observation platform, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Perhaps this is simply their way of demonstrating strength. Many cultures consider displays of power to be appropriate in formal diplomatic contexts. Displays of power. Kreth spat the words like venom. That vessel could annihilate every ship in this sector without breaking stride. This is not a display of power. This is a threat. A promise of destruction if we do not comply with whatever demands they intend to make. High Counselor? Threx sat in his elevated chair above the speaking floor, his dark features unreadable as he listened to the increasingly frantic debate, the confidence he had displayed when dismissing Vela's earlier concerns was nowhere to be seen. His tactical advisors had been feeding him projections and probability calculations since the first images of the Prometheus arrived, and the numbers they presented painted a picture of the Council's military vulnerability that Threx had never imagined possible. The combined defensive fleet of the Galactic Council numbered over 40,000 vessels, an armada that had maintained peace across 400 worlds for millennia. Those ships were crewed by experienced warriors and equipped with the most advanced technology that hundreds of species working together could produce. They had been considered an overwhelming force, capable of deterring any threat the galaxy might produce, according to the tactical projections now displayed on Threx's private screen. The Prometheus alone could engage the Council's entire defensive perimeter with a 63% probability of achieving total victory. A single ship against 40,000. And the single ship was the likely winner. Threx felt something he had not experienced in centuries of leadership. He felt genuine fear. How is this possible? He demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos of the chamber and silencing the assembled representatives with its commanding tone. The humans were burning fossil fuels a single century ago. They were fighting wars with projectile weapons and primitive explosives. How does any species advance this quickly? No one in the chamber had an answer. The silence stretched on for several uncomfortable moments until a thin voice spoke from the shadows, near the back of the assembly. Because they were never primitive, the voice said. They were recovering. Every head in the chamber turned toward the speaker. An ancient figure moving slowly toward the speaking floor with the careful steps of someone who had lived far too long. The Keeper of Records was the oldest member of the Council's administrative body, a position held by individuals who dedicated their entire existence to maintaining the historical archives of galactic civilization. This particular keeper had served in her role for over 6,000 cycles, and she carried within her memory information that most species had long forgotten. Explain yourself, Threx commanded, leaning forward in his chair with sudden intensity. What do you mean they were recovering? The keeper reached the center of the speaking floor and stood beneath the holographic image of the Prometheus, her frail body illuminated by the cold light of the vessel's projection. Our earliest records of the human species date back approximately 12,000 cycles, she began, her voice thin with age but steady with absolute certainty. Even then, they showed signs of unusual development patterns. They were aggressive, yes, but also remarkably adaptable. They spread across their world faster than any species we had previously documented. This is known. Kreth interrupted impatiently. What does ancient history have to do with the weapon currently threatening our diplomatic delegation? The Keeper turned her ancient eyes toward the Valorian representative, and something in her gaze made him shrink back into silence. The humans did not simply develop technology, she continued. They nearly destroyed themselves with it, not once but multiple times. Our monitoring stations recorded global conflicts that killed millions of their kind. They developed weapons capable of rendering their entire planet uninhabitable and came within moments of using them on several occasions. She paused, allowing her words to sink into the stunned assembly. Most species that reach such a point either destroy themselves completely or abandon the path of technological advancement in favor of peaceful stagnation. The humans did neither. They stood at the edge of extinction, looked into the abyss of their own destruction, and they did not flinch. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every representative hanging on the keeper's words with rapt attention. They learned, she said simply. They took every lesson that their conflicts and near extinctions had taught them, and they applied those lessons with a dedication that borders on obsession. Their wars became laboratories for innovation. Their disasters became catalysts for unity. Every time they came close to destroying themselves, they emerged stronger and more capable than before. She gestured toward the holographic image above her. That vessel is not the product of sudden advancement. It is the culmination of a species that has been at war with itself for its entire existence. They did not build ships to explore the cosmos or to trade with alien civilizations. They built ships because they understand at the deepest level of their collective consciousness that the universe is not safe. High Counselor Threx stared at the ancient keeper with an expression of dawning horror. They expect conflict, he said slowly. They anticipate threats because they have always been their own greatest threat. Precisely, the keeper confirmed. And they have prepared accordingly, whatever they found when they finally looked beyond their own world. They were determined to face it from a position of absolute strength. They would never again be vulnerable. Never again be caught unprepared. She turned to face the assembly, her ancient eyes sweeping across the frightened representatives of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. We assumed they were primitive because we measured them against our own standards of development. We were fools. They were never behind us. They were simply walking a different path. A path forged in fire and blood and the ashes of their own near annihilation. Ambassador Krath found his voice again, though it was considerably weaker than before. What do they want from us? The keeper shook her head slowly. That is the question that will determine the future of galactic civilization. And I suspect we will learn the answer very soon. As if summoned by her words, a communication alert chimed through the chamber. The human delegation had departed the Prometheus and was approaching the diplomatic vessel. First contact was about to begin, and the council could only wait in terrified anticipation for whatever would come next. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the command bridge of the Prometheus, her hands clasped behind her, back as she watched the small alien diplomatic vessel through the main view screen. She was a woman of average height with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that carried the weight of decades of military service. Her uniform was simple and practical, bearing none of the elaborate decorations that many spacefaring cultures use to denote rank and achievement. The only symbol she wore was a small patch on her shoulder, depicting a blue and green sphere. The image of Earth, as seen from Space Commander Chen Wei, stood beside her, his tablet displaying readouts from the ship's sensor arrays as they continued to gather information about the alien vessel and the beings inside it. Their communication frequencies are saturated with encrypted transmissions, he reported, his voice carefully neutral. They are sending everything they observe directly back to their central government. Sensor analysis suggests significant stress indicators in their biological signatures. They are terrified of us. Elena observed without any particular emotion in her voice. Can you blame them? Chun replied, gesturing toward the viewport where the massive bulk of the Prometheus stretched away into the darkness. We did not exactly arrive in a friendly-looking vessel. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. No, we did not. She turned away from the viewport and walked toward the ready room adjacent to the bridge, gesturing for Chun to follow her. The door sealed behind them, providing a moment of privacy from the hundreds of crew members who operated the various systems of the dreadnought. You know why we had to come this way, Elena said, settling into a chair and rubbing her eyes with obvious weariness. The Council had to understand what we are from the very first moment of contact. There could be no ambiguity, no room for miscalculation. Chun nodded slowly. Though his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced, the psychological impact on them will be significant. They may never be able to see us as anything other than a threat. Better they see us as a threat they can negotiate with than as prey they can exploit. Elena replied, her voice carrying the hard edge of someone who had learned difficult lessons through painful experience. We studied their transmissions for decades before we made contact. We know how they treat species they perceive as weak. She stood and walked to the small viewport in the ready room, staring out at the stars that surrounded them. The Valorian collective absorbed 3 emerging civilizations in the past 2 centuries alone, conquering them through economic manipulation and cultural subversion before anyone could object. The crawl-hunting clans still practice ritual warfare against any species they deem inferior. The Council itself maintains a tiered membership system that relegates newly contacted species to second-class status for generations. We are not naive. Chun agreed. But there may have been a middle path between arriving in a shuttle and arriving in the most powerful warship humanity has ever constructed. Elena shook her head. There was no middle path. Commander, not for us. She turned to face him, and Chun saw something in her eyes that he had witnessed many times before. The deep well of sorrow that lay beneath her captain's composure. Humanity crawled out of its cradle bearing scars that will never fully heal. 2 world wars that killed over 100 million of our own kind. A century of Cold War that nearly ended in nuclear fire on at least 3 separate occasions. Climate collapse that drowned our coastal cities and turned fertile lands into deserts, killing billions more through famine and displacement. Her voice grew quieter but no less intense. And finally, the Unification Wars, 30 years of conflict as humanity tore itself apart one last time before finally choosing to stop fighting itself. I was a child when those wars began. Commander, I lost my parents, my siblings, my entire community to violence that accomplished nothing except demonstrating how efficiently we could destroy each other. She paused. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, we built the Prometheus and her sister ships, not because we wanted to conquer the galaxy. We built them because we knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a species that had nearly committed suicide multiple times, that the universe would not be kind to us if we arrived without the means to defend ourselves. The Council has maintained peace for thousands of years, Chun pointed out gently. Perhaps they are not the threat we anticipated. Peace maintained through overwhelming force and the subjugation of weaker species, Elena countered. Peace that serves the interests of those who already hold power while ensuring that newcomers remain forever dependent on the established order. That is not the kind of peace humanity will accept. A chime from the communication system interrupted their conversation. Captain, the diplomatic shuttle is ready for departure. The voice of Lieutenant Torres reported from the bridge. Ambassador Kim and his team are assembled in the launch bay. Elena straightened her uniform and moved toward the door. Tell the ambassador I will be joining the delegation personally. Chen's eyes widened in surprise. Captain, protocol suggests that you remain aboard the Prometheus during first contact if something goes wrong. We cannot afford to lose our commanding officer. Protocol was written by people who expected first contact to follow predictable patterns. Elena replied with a slight smile. I need to be there, Commander. The aliens need to see me, to understand that the person commanding this vessel is not a monster or a conqueror, but someone who has seen enough destruction to know its true cost. She paused at the door, looking back at her first officer. We came here to offer them something the galaxy has never had before. That offer needs to come from someone who can look them in the eyes and make them believe it. Chun remained silent for a moment, then nodded in reluctant acceptance. The ship will be waiting for your return, Captain. Try not to start any interstellar wars while you are over there. Elena's smile grew slightly wider. No promises. Commander. She walked onto the bridge and headed for the turbolift that would take her to the launch bay, passing dozens of crew members who watched her with expressions of respect and concern. These men and women had served with her through some of humanity's darkest moments and brightest achievements. They trusted her to lead them into the unknown and bring them safely home again. Elena hoped she could prove worthy of that trust. The shuttle was waiting when she arrived, a sleek craft designed for speed and maneuverability, rather than the raw power that characterized its mothership. Ambassador Kim stood at the boarding ramp, his diplomatic team arrayed behind him in formal dress uniforms. "Captain," he said with a slight bow, "I was not informed that you would be joining us." "A last-minute decision," Elena replied. "I felt it was important for the aliens to see the face behind the warship, to understand that we are not simply a military force seeking conquest." Kim studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps you were right. Sometimes the most important negotiations happen between individuals rather than institutions." They boarded the shuttle together, and moments later, the small craft detached from the Prometheus and began its journey across the void toward the waiting alien vessel. Elena watched through the viewport as her ship receded into the distance, its massive hull gradually shrinking until it was just another shadow against the stars. She thought about everything humanity had sacrificed to reach this moment. All the lives lost, all the suffering endured, all the hard lessons learned through blood and tears. Whatever happened next, she was determined to make that sacrifice mean something. Ambassador Vela stood alone in the receiving bay of the diplomatic vessel, her 4 eyes fixed on the airlock door where the human delegation would soon appear. The council had wanted to send armed guards to flank her during this historic meeting. Soldiers equipped with the most advanced weapons available to ensure her safety in the presence of beings who had arrived in a vessel capable of destroying worlds. Vela had refused if the humans intended violence. No number of guards would save her or anyone else aboard the small diplomatic craft. Their dreadnought could vaporize the entire vessel with a single weapon discharge, leaving nothing but scattered atoms drifting through the empty void. Surrounding herself with soldiers would accomplish nothing except demonstrating weakness disguised as strength. Better to face the unknown with dignity than to hide behind protections that offered only the illusion of safety. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and Vela felt her heart accelerate as the first humans she had ever seen in person stepped into the receiving bay. They were smaller than she had expected, the species that had built that mountain of destruction, that terrifying monument to military power, were soft-looking creatures barely taller than Vela herself. Their bodies appeared fragile, lacking the natural armor or weapons that many spacefaring species possessed. They had no claws, no venomous appendages, no apparent physical advantages that would explain their dominance over their homeworld, and yet something in the way they moved spoke of danger. Something in the careful precision of their steps and the alertness of their eyes suggested predators wearing the skin of prey. The woman leading the Cindy's delegation was unremarkable in almost every physical aspect, with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of age and experience. She wore a simple uniform bearing only a single decoration, a small image of a blue and green sphere that Vela recognized as the human's home world. "Ambassador Vela," the woman said, her voice calm and measured. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez, commander of the Earth vessel Prometheus. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Vela inclined her head in the formal gesture of greeting that her species used. "Captain Vasquez, the Galactic Council welcomes humanity to the greater community of spacefaring civilizations. Though I must confess, Your choice of vessel for this occasion has caused considerable concern among our member worlds." A slight smile crossed the human captain's weathered features. "You are afraid of us." "It was not a question. Your ship could destroy this vessel in moments," Vela replied, seeing no point in denying the obvious. "It could likely destroy our entire defensive fleet without significant difficulty. We have never encountered a first-contact species with such capabilities." "So yes, Captain, we are afraid." The human captain nodded slowly, as if this response was exactly what she had expected. "Do you know why we came in the Prometheus instead of a diplomatic shuttle?" she asked. Vela shook her head, her four eyes never leaving the human's face as she searched for any sign of hostile intent. "Because we needed you to understand something from the very beginning," the captain continued, taking a step closer to Vela. "Something that could not be communicated through words or promises or diplomatic assurances. And what is that?" "We are not naive," Captain Vasquez said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We are not innocent. We are not a species of peaceful explorers who believe the universe will treat them kindly, simply because they wish it so. We have seen what happens when peaceful peoples meet violent ones unprepared. We have seen it because we were the violent ones." She paused, and Vela saw something shift in the human's eyes, a glimpse of old pain that had never fully healed. "We did this to each other," the captain said. "For thousands of years we waged war against ourselves. We invented weapons of unimaginable destruction and used them without hesitation. We came within a hair's breadth of rendering our own planet uninhabitable on multiple occasions. We are a species that nearly committed suicide through our own aggression. The keeper of records spoke of this," Vela said softly. "She called you a recovering civilization. An accurate description," Captain Vasquez agreed. "We are still recovering. We may always be recovering. The scars of our past are burned too deeply into our collective memory to ever fully disappear." She gestured toward the viewport, where the massive silhouette of the Prometheus hung against the stars like a dark moon. "That ship is not a threat, Ambassador. It is a promise to ourselves and to anyone we encounter. We will never be victims. We will never be conquered. We will never again be caught unprepared by violence, whether it comes from within our own species or from beyond the stars." Vela considered these words carefully, her mind working through the implications of what the human was telling her. "And what of species who cannot make such a promise?" she asked. "What of those who lack the means to defend themselves? Are they simply to be left to the mercy of those who possess greater power?" Captain Vasquez smiled, and for the first time since the meeting began, the expression seemed genuinely warm. "That is precisely why we are here," she said. "We did not come to frighten you, though I understand that fear was an inevitable consequence of our approach. We came to offer you something the galaxy has never had before. What could you possibly offer us that we do not already possess?" Vela asked, genuinely puzzled. "The Council has maintained peace for millennia. Our civilization spans hundreds of worlds. What do you believe you can provide that we lack?" The human captain took another step forward, close enough now that Vela could see the individual lines and marks that age had carved into her face, an ally that has already survived its worst enemy. Captain Vasquez said, "Itself." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that Vela was only beginning to comprehend. "We know what we are," the captain continued. "We know the darkness that lives within our species, the capacity for destruction that almost consumed us, but we also know something else. We know that it is possible to face that darkness and choose a different path, not because the darkness disappears, but because you become strong enough to contain it." She extended her hand toward Vela in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting common to her species. "We offer the Council a partnership. Not subordination, not membership in your hierarchy, but genuine alliance between equals. Our technology, our resources, our military capabilities, available to any world that chooses to stand with us. And in return, we ask only one thing. Vela stared at the extended hand, her mind racing. What do you ask? That you never try to subjugate us, Captain Vasquez said simply. That you treat us as partners rather than subjects. That you recognize our right to exist as we choose, without interference or manipulation. She smiled again. That surprisingly warm expression that seemed so out of place on the face of someone who commanded such terrifying power. We have spent our entire history fighting for the right to determine our own destiny. First against nature, then against each other. Now against whatever the universe might send our way. All we have ever wanted is to be free. And we are prepared to defend that freedom with everything we have. Vela reached out with her own hand and clasped the human captain's offered grip, feeling the warmth of alien flesh against her own scales. I cannot speak for the entire council, she said carefully. There will be those who see your arrival as a threat, regardless of your stated intentions. There will be those who seek to exploit or manipulate this situation for their own advantage. We expect nothing less, Captain Vasquez replied. Politics and power games are universal constants. But we have learned patience along with all our other hard lessons. We can wait for the council to make its decision. And we can demonstrate through our actions that our words are genuine. She released Vela's hand and stepped back, her eyes still holding that strange mixture of warmth and steel. We are humanity. Ambassador, we have survived everything the universe has thrown at us so far, including ourselves, and we are not going anywhere. Vela looked at this small, fragile-seeming creature who commanded weapons capable of ending civilizations. And she understood at last why her instincts had screamed warnings from the moment the human transmission arrived. It was not because the humans were hostile. It was because they were survivors and survivors. She realized were the most dangerous beings in the universe, not because they sought conflict, but because they had already endured the worst and emerged unbroken, whatever future lay ahead for the Galactic Council. Vela knew with absolute certainty that humanity would be part of it. Whether as allies or adversaries would depend entirely on how the Council chose to respond to this unprecedented moment. She hoped her people would be wise enough to choose correctly. The alternative did not bear contemplating.